My life had become a study in the color gray. Not the soft, heathered gray of a well-loved sweater, but the flat, unyielding gray of a winter sky that promised nothing but more of itself. I'd moved to this small, forgotten town in the mountains to paint, or at least that's what I told people. The truth was I'd come here to disappear. My previous life, vibrant and loud and full of a love that had ultimately hollowed me out, was something I wanted to forget. So I surrounded myself with silence and the muted tones of the forest, hoping the quiet would seep into my bones and still the frantic, lonely rhythm of my own heart. My cabin was small, more of a glorified shed with plumbing, perched on a hill overlooking a valley that was usually shrouded in mist. It was isolated, which was the entire point. I spent my days sketching the skeletal branches of trees, the stoic faces of rocks, the endless expanse of that gray sky. My nights were filled with the sound of the wind and the creaks and groans of an old wooden structure settling into the cold earth. It was a peaceful, monotonous existence, and I was mostly content with its emptiness. Then the disturbances began. Small things, at first. A garden gnome I didn't own appearing on my porch. My woodpile restacked into a strange, spiraling pattern. A single, muddy boot print left just outside my door, too large to be mine. It wasn't frightening so much as it was unsettling, a persistent, low-grade hum of wrongness that disrupted my carefully constructed solitude. It was an intrusion, a reminder that the world existed beyond my little hermitage, and that it could touch me whether I wanted it to or not. After a week of these oddities, culminating in finding my porch swing unhooked and laid carefully on the ground, I finally conceded. I needed to call the sheriff. The idea filled me with a familiar, weary dread. I didn't like dealing with people, especially not authority figures in small towns who likely saw a city transplant like me as an oddity at best, a problem at worst. But the alternative, lying awake at night listening for every snap of a twig, was worse. So I dialed the number, my voice feeling rusty from disuse. He arrived less than an hour later. His truck, a dark blue Ford that had seen its share of dirt roads, crunched to a stop on the gravel driveway. I watched from the window as he got out. He wasn't what I expected. I'd pictured someone older, paunchier, with a face permanently set in a suspicious squint. But the man who walked toward my cabin was tall and broad-shouldered, moving with a quiet economy that spoke of innate confidence. He wore the standard uniform, tan shirt and dark trousers, but it seemed less like a costume and more like a second skin. His name was Cole Evans. He introduced himself in a voice that was low and steady, a gravelly baritone that seemed to absorb the ambient noise around it. He didn't smile, but his eyes, a deep, difficult-to-read shade of brown, held a flicker of something that wasn't unkindness. He looked at me, really looked at me, and I felt a strange jolt, the uncomfortable sensation of being seen after a long time spent trying to be invisible. "You're the one who called about the gnomes?" he asked, one corner of his mouth twitching slightly. The hint of a smile was there and gone before I could properly register it. I felt a flush of heat creep up my neck. And the woodpile. And the boot print. I sounded defensive, childish. He just nodded, his gaze sweeping over the property. "Right. Mind if I take a look around?" I spent the next 20 minutes trailing behind him like a nervous shadow while he inspected everything. He had a way of observing the world that was both patient and intense. He crouched down to examine the boot print, his large hands hovering over the mud without touching it. He ran a hand over the restacked wood, his expression unreadable. I found myself watching his hands. They were big, capable, with clean, short-trimmed nails and a dusting of dark hair on the knuckles. They were hands that looked like they knew how to fix things, how to hold things, how to be steady. He didn't say much. He'd ask a simple question. "When did you first notice this? Hear anything last night?" And then fall silent again, absorbing my answer, his focus already back on the evidence around him. The silence between us wasn't awkward. It was full. It was filled with the sounds of the forest, the scent of pine and damp earth, and the quiet, solid presence of him. It was the first time in months that the silence in my life hadn't felt like a symptom of my own loneliness. After he'd completed his circuit of the property, he stopped on the porch, turning to face me. He was closer now, and I could smell the faint, clean scent of his soap, mixed with coffee and something uniquely him, something warm and solid like sun-baked leather. It was a grounding smell. "Well," he said, his voice that same low rumble. It's probably kids. Teenagers with nothing better to do, trying to spook the new guy. Oh, the explanation was so mundane, so logical, that it felt almost disappointing. He must have seen the look on my face, because that slight twitch returned to his lips. Doesn't mean we don't take it seriously. It's trespassing. Harassment. I'll increase patrols up this way. Have one of my deputies swing by a couple times a night. Thank you, I said, the words feeling inadequate. He nodded, his eyes lingering on me for a moment. It was a strange look, one I couldn't decipher. It wasn't pity, or suspicion, or amusement. It was just observation. A quiet, steady assessment. It made me feel pinned in place, like a butterfly under glass. Then he blinked, and the moment was gone. He gave me his card, his fingers brushing mine as he handed it to me. The touch was brief, accidental, but it sent a surprising little shock up my arm. Just a touch. Nothing. But I was still feeling the warmth of it long after his truck had disappeared down the winding dirt road. For the next few weeks, a quiet routine established itself. The strange occurrences didn't stop entirely, but they became less frequent. A rake moved from one side of the yard to the other. A painted rock, one of those cheesy ones with welcome on it, left on my doorstep. And true to his word, Cole Evans became a recurring figure in my gray-toned life. Sometimes it was him, sometimes it was a younger deputy, but more often than not, it was the sheriff himself who would make the slow drive up my road. I'd see his truck coming and my stomach would do a little flip, a nervous flutter I hadn't felt in years. I'd watch from my window, pretending to be absorbed in a sketch, as he did a slow loop of the property. He never stayed long. A quick check, a walk around the perimeter of the cabin, and then a single, solid knock on my door. "Everything quiet, Leo?" he'd ask. He'd started using my first name after the second visit. It sounded different in his mouth. Solid. Real. Quiet. I'd confirm, and that would be most of the conversation. But I started to notice things. The way his eyes would flick to my easel, taking in the canvas of the day. He never commented on my art, but he always looked. I noticed the way he'd lean against the doorframe, one hand resting on his belt, an unconscious posture that was both relaxed and ready. I learned the sound of his breathing, a slow, even rhythm that was strangely calming. I started sketching him, not overtly, but from memory. I sketched the line of his jaw, the way his dark hair curled just a bit at his collar, the set of his shoulders in his uniform. I tried to capture the stillness in his eyes, that unreadable depth that held so much in reserve. My sketchbook, once filled with barren landscapes and empty rooms, slowly began to fill with him. One afternoon, he knocked on the door, and I opened it to find him holding a thermos. "Figured you might be cold," he said, by way of explanation. "Coffee's still hot." I was so surprised I just stood there for a second, staring at the beat-up silver thermos in his hand. "Oh, you don't have to do that, I know," he said. He held it out. But I did. I took it, our fingers brushing again. This time I was ready for it. But the jolt was still there, a low, pleasant hum that spread through my chest. The coffee was black and strong, and it tasted like diner coffee, honest and without pretense. It was the best thing I'd tasted in months. We stood on the porch, me sipping from the plastic cup, him just watching the valley. "You ever miss the city?" he asked, his voice quiet. The question caught me off guard. "No," I answered, maybe too quickly. "It's too loud. Too many people." He nodded, a slow, thoughtful gesture. "I get that. Grew up here. Left for a while. College, then a job in a bigger department. Hated it. Came back as soon as I could." It was the most he'd ever shared about himself. A small crack in the stoic facade. He was admitting a vulnerability, a preference for the quiet that mirrored my own. It was a tiny thread of connection, but I grabbed onto it with an embarrassing amount of desperation. "What did you hate about it?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He was silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "The noise," he finally said. "Not the traffic or the sirens. The other noise. Everyone trying to be heard. Here, you can just be. You can just be." The words echoed in my head. That's what I'd been trying to do. But I hadn't been being. I'd been hiding. He seemed to understand that without me having to say a word. He understood the appeal of the quiet, the need for space. He finished his own coffee and rinsed his cup with water from my rain barrel. As he was leaving, he paused at the edge of the porch. "The prankster left you another gift," he said, gesturing with his chin toward the treeling. I looked over and saw it. A ridiculously garish pink flamingo, the plastic kind, stuck into the soft earth at the edge of my property. It was so absurd, so out of place against the muted greens and browns of the forest, that I couldn't help it. I laughed. A real laugh. A sound I hadn't heard from my own throat in a long, long time. When I looked back at Cole, he was watching me, and for the first time, he was giving me a full, genuine smile. It transformed his face, crinkling the corners of his eyes and softening the hard line of his mouth. It was like the sun breaking through that perpetual gray sky. My heart did more than flutter. It lurched, and I knew, with a sudden, terrifying certainty, that I was in trouble. The flamingo marked a shift. The pranks became more bizarre, almost playful. A string of Christmas lights appeared draped over a bush one morning. A single, pristine bowling pin was left standing sentinel on my driveway. It was clear now that whoever was doing this wasn't malicious. They were just weird. The threat had dissipated, replaced by a strange, ongoing joke with an invisible punchline. But the visits from Cole didn't stop. If anything, they became more frequent, and the pretense of official police business grew thinner with each one. He started bringing things. Another thermos of coffee, a bag of apples from a local orchard. Once, a thick, woolen blanket he said was a spare from his truck. "Gets cold up here at night," was his only explanation, but the way he said it felt like he was tucking the words around me. We started talking more. Not about anything important, really. We talked about the weather, the ridiculously long winter, the quality of the coffee at the town's only diner. But woven into these mundane conversations were small, startling moments of intimacy. He'd ask about the painting I was working on, a real question, not just polite filler. He'd listen, truly listen, as I tried to explain how I was trying to capture the quality of the light just before a storm. One evening, he arrived just as the sun was setting, painting the gray sky with streaks of bruised purple and fiery orange. He didn't knock. I saw his truck pull up and just open the door. He had 2 brown paper bags in his arms. "My turn to cook," he said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. My cabin was one large room, a combined living, sleeping, and studio space, with a tiny kitchen alcove. It was cluttered, messy with the detritus of my life. Canvases leaning against walls, half-empty mugs, books piled on every surface. I suddenly felt intensely self-conscious of the intimacy of the space, of him being inside it, breathing the air thick with the scent of turpentine and my own solitude. He didn't seem to notice the mess. He moved with an easy confidence, setting the bags on my small counter and starting to unpack them. Steak, potatoes, a head of broccoli. Simple, solid food. He navigated my tiny kitchen as if he'd been in it 100 times, finding a pan, turning on the stove, his movements efficient and sure. "You can, sit down," he said, glancing over his shoulder at me. I was just standing there, hovering uselessly in the middle of the room. I sat. I watched him cook. He rolled up the sleeves of his uniform shirt, revealing strong, corded forearms dusted with dark hair. He focused on the task with the same quiet intensity he applied to everything else. The cabin filled with the sounds and smells of searing meat and garlic, overwhelming the familiar sense of paint and loneliness. It was a profoundly domestic scene, and the simple reality of it made my chest ache. We ate at my small, paint-spattered table. The steak was perfect. He didn't talk much while he ate, but the silence was comfortable, companionable. It felt less like an absence of words and more like a shared moment of peace. After we finished, he insisted on washing the dishes, standing at my small sink, his broad back to me. "You never told me why you really left the city," he said, his voice low over the sound of running water. I hadn't told anyone. But looking at the strong, steady line of his back, the words just came out. "I was in love with someone," I said, my voice thin. "For a long time. I thought we were building a life. But I was just a project for him. A phase. When he got bored, he left. And I fell apart. Came here to put myself back together, I guess. Or at least to hide the pieces." He finished the last plate and turned off the water. He dried his hands on a dish towel, his movements slow and deliberate. He turned to face me, his expression serious, his deep brown eyes holding mine. "His loss," he said. The words were simple, direct. There was no pity in his voice, only a quiet statement of fact. And for some reason, coming from him, It felt like the truest thing I'd ever heard. He held my gaze for a long moment, and the air between us crackled with everything that wasn't being said. I could feel the pull of it, the gravity of his presence drawing me in. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. I wanted to close the distance between us. I wanted to touch him. I wanted him to touch me. But the moment passed. He broke eye contact, clearing his throat. "I should get going," he said. And just like that, he was gone, leaving me alone in my cabin that now felt both emptier and infinitely more full than it had an hour before. The lingering scent of cooked steak and his clean, masculine scent clung to the air, a ghost of the intimacy we had almost shared. I went to bed that night and dreamed of steady brown eyes and the taste of a smile I'd only seen once. The town of Hemlock Ridge was small enough that secrets were a currency, and privacy was a luxury no one could afford. I mostly kept to myself, making a weekly trip to the general store for supplies and avoiding eye contact. But I was still the artist from the city, an object of mild curiosity and suspicion. And now, I was the artist the sheriff kept visiting. I saw the looks, the whispered conversations that stopped when I walked past. I felt their judgment like a physical weight. One Saturday, I was in the store picking up milk and bread when a group of men came in. They were loud, reeking of stale beer and belligerence. I recognized one of them, a guy named Dale whose family owned a failing lumber mill on the edge of town. He had a mean, pinched face and eyes that were always looking for a fight. He saw me, and a nasty smirk spread across his face. "Well, look what we have here," he said, his voice loud enough for the whole store to hear. "It's the sheriff's special friend," his buddies snickered. I ignored them, keeping my head down and moving toward the checkout counter. "What's the matter?" Dale drawled, stepping in front of me to block my path. "Too good to talk to us regular folk? Or does Sheriff Evans tell you not to talk to strangers?" My hands clenched into fists at my sides. I could feel my face burning. I just wanted to pay for my groceries and leave. "Leave him alone, Dale," the woman behind the counter said, her voice sharp. Dale just laughed. "Oh, I'm just being neighborly. Want to know what kind of special services our sheriff is providing up on that hill of yours?" His eyes roamed over me, a slimy, insinuating gaze that made my skin crawl. My throat was tight. Words failed me. All the old fears, the familiar shame, came rushing back. I was 13 again, being cornered in a locker room, the same ugly words being spat at me. I felt small, weak, exposed. And then the bell on the store's door chimed. Cole walked in. He wasn't in uniform, just jeans and a dark gray Henley that stretched across his chest. He took in the scene in an instant. Me, frozen and pale, Dale and his friends, puffed up and aggressive. Cole's face went hard, his eyes turning to chips of cold, dark stone. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, his voice a low, dangerous rumble that cut through the tension in the store. Dale's bravado faltered. "Just having a conversation, Sheriff. Looked like you were done," Cole said, taking a step forward. He moved with that same quiet grace, but now there was a predatory stillness to it. He was a wolf, not a sheepdog. He came to stand beside me, a solid wall of warmth and strength at my back. The message was clear. "You want him, you go through me." Dale and his friends muttered something and shuffled out of the store, their drunken courage evaporating in the face of Cole's silent authority. The store was quiet again, the only sound the hum of the beverage cooler. "You okay?" Cole asked, his voice softening as he turned to me. I couldn't speak. I just nodded, my entire body trembling. He put a hand on my shoulder, his thumb rubbing a small, soothing circle against the tense muscle. The simple touch was grounding, a lifeline. "Come on," he said gently. "Let's get you out of here." He paid for my groceries, ignoring my fumbled protests, and walked me out to his truck. The street felt hostile, every window a pair of watching eyes. We got to his truck, and I thought we were leaving. But he stopped, turning to face me, his expression grim. He looked past me, at the curb where Dale and his friends were now loitering, watching us. A muscle in Cole's jaw ticked. Then he looked back at me. His eyes were dark, intense. "They're watching," he said, his voice a low murmur meant only for me. "We need to give them something to talk about. Something they'll understand." I didn't understand. "What?" "Sheriff Cole," Evans called me from the curb. His voice was a low command, a strange mix of rough and gentle. "Hands here," he said, and he took my hands. placing them flat against the cool metal hood of his truck. The gesture was oddly intimate, almost possessive. My mind reeled, trying to catch up. What was happening? He leaned in close, his body shielding mine from the prying eyes on the street. His scent filled my senses, that clean soap, the leather, the undeniable scent of him. It was overwhelming, intoxicating. His face was inches from mine, his gaze locked on my mouth. My heart is pounding. This is it. This is a performance. Just follow my lead. He whispered, his breath warm against my cheek. And then he pressed me to the hood with a kiss. It wasn't gentle. It was firm, demanding, a statement. His mouth claimed mine with a certainty that left no room for doubt. It was a kiss for an audience, designed to be seen, to be unambiguous. It was meant to shut them up, to draw a line in the sand. But the moment his lips touched mine, the performance fell away. For me, at least. The world narrowed to this single point of contact. The rough texture of his lips, the faint taste of coffee, the solid pressure of his body against mine. His hand came up to cup the back of my neck, fingers tangling in my hair, holding me steady. It wasn't an act. It felt real. It felt like every unspoken word, every lingering glance, every moment of shared silence had led to this. It was a release, a confession, a breaking point. My hands, which he'd placed on the hood, curled into fists, gripping the cold metal to anchor myself. It probably lasted only a few seconds, but it stretched into an eternity. When he finally pulled back, his eyes were dark, his breathing slightly uneven. He didn't let go of me immediately. He kept his hand on my neck, his thumb stroking softly against my skin. He glanced over my shoulder, toward the street. I heard a car door slam and an engine roar to life. "They're gone," he said, his voice rough. He let go of me then, and the absence of his touch was like a physical blow. He stepped back, putting a careful foot of distance between us. The air was thick, charged. I couldn't look at him. I stared at the hood of his truck, at the distorted reflection of the gray sky, my mind a chaotic swirl of sensation and fear. What just happened? What did it mean? "Get in," he said, his voice back to its usual steady tone, betraying none of the turmoil I felt. The ride back to my cabin was the longest 10 minutes of my life. The silence in the truck was a living thing. It was immense, suffocating. I stared out the passenger window, watching the familiar trees blur past, but I wasn't seeing them. I was replaying the kiss, the feel of his mouth on mine, the solid weight of his hand in my hair. I could still feel it, a phantom pressure, a lingering heat. I risked a glance at him. He was focused on the road, his hands gripping the steering wheel, his knuckles white. The muscle in his jaw was ticking again. His stoic mask was back in place, but I could see the cracks. He was no calmer than I was. He pulled up to my cabin and killed the engine. The silence deepened. Neither of us moved. The engine ticked as it cooled. He finally broke the quiet, his voice low. "I'm sorry if I overstepped," I turned to him. "Did you?" His eyes met mine, and the raw emotion in them stole my breath. There was no artifice there, no performance. Just a deep, aching vulnerability that mirrored my own. "That wasn't just for them, Leo," he said, his voice barely a whisper. The confession hung in the air between us, simple and devastating. It was everything I had been too afraid to hope for. Relief washed over me, so potent it made me dizzy. I didn't know what to say. The words I needed were buried too deep under years of fear and self-doubt. So I did the only thing I could. I reached across the console, my hand trembling, and laid my fingers over his on the steering wheel. He flinched, just for a second. Then his hand turned over, his fingers lacing with mine. His grip was strong, sure. It was an answer. He got out of the truck and came around to my side, opening the door for me. We walked to my cabin, our hands still linked, and stepped inside. He closed the door behind us, shutting out the rest of the world. He didn't let go of my hand. He just stood there in the middle of my cluttered, messy room, looking at me. All the walls were down. All the masks were gone. I could see the uncertainty in his eyes, the question he was too afraid to ask. So I asked it for him. I lifted his hand, the one intertwined with mine, and pressed my lips to his knuckles. I kept my eyes on his, a silent confession of my own. He let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for a very long time. He stepped forward, closing the last bit of distance between us. He raised his other hand and gently cupped my jaw, his thumb stroking my cheek. "Leo," he breathed, and my name was a prayer on his lips. And then he kissed me again. This kiss was nothing like the one before. There was no audience, no anger, no pretense. It was slow. It was hesitant. It was a question and an answer all at once. His lips were soft, searching. It wasn't a kiss of passion, but of discovery, of recognition. It tasted of relief. It felt like coming home after a long, lonely journey. I melted into him, my hands coming up to rest on his chest, feeling the steady, solid beat of his heart beneath my palms. It was the most reassuring sound in the world. We stood there for a long time, just holding each other, our foreheads pressed together, sharing the same air. The frantic energy of the last hour bled away, replaced by a deep, quiet calm. The gray in my world was gone, replaced by the warm, steady brown of his eyes. When I woke the next morning, the space beside me in the bed was empty. For a terrifying, heart-stopping moment, panic seized me. I shot up, my eyes scanning the small cabin. His clothes were gone. His boots weren't by the door. It was a dream. I imagined it all. The fight, the kiss, the quiet, earth-shattering confession. The shame and disappointment were so sharp, so familiar, they almost made me double over. Then I saw it. On the small table beside my bed, there was a piece of paper, folded in half, with my name on it. It was a page torn from my own sketchbook. His handwriting was a strong, no-nonsense script. Had to get to the station. We'll call. Cole. The relief was so profound it left me weak-kneed. It was real. It had happened. He hadn't run. He hadn't disappeared. He had a job, a life, responsibilities. Of course he had to leave. I clutched the note to my chest, the simple words a balm on my frayed nerves. I spent the morning in a state of suspended animation, a daze of anxious hope. I tried to paint, but I couldn't focus. I just kept staring at the door, waiting, listening for the sound of his truck. By afternoon, the anxiety had begun to curdle into doubt. He said he would call. He hadn't. Maybe he regretted it. Maybe in the clear light of day, kissing the town outcast didn't seem like such a good idea. My old insecurities, my constant companions, whispered their poison in my ear. He was the town sheriff, respected and steady. I was a recluse, a problem, a scandal waiting to happen. What could he possibly see in me? I was working myself into a full-blown spiral when I heard it. The crunch of gravel. I rushed to the window, my heart in my throat. It was his truck. He was here. He got out, but he wasn't in uniform this time. He wore jeans and a faded black t-shirt that hugged his shoulders. He was carrying a brown paper bag that smelled, impossibly, like fresh donuts. He walked up to the porch and knocked, a soft, hesitant rap, completely different from his official, commanding knock. I pulled the door open. We just looked at each other for a long moment. His eyes were full of a quiet worry. "You didn't call," I said, the words coming out as a breathless accusation. A small, rueful smile touched his lips. Figured this was better than a call. He held up the bag of donuts. "Peace offering." I stepped aside to let him in. He placed the bag on the counter and turned to me, his hands finding my waist, pulling me gently toward him. "I didn't want to wake you," he said, his voice low and sincere. "You were sleeping so soundly." I haven't seen anyone look that peaceful in a long time." His reassurance was a quiet thing, an action more than a statement. His hands on my hips, the softness in his eyes, the simple fact that he came back, it was enough. It was more than enough. I leaned my head against his chest, listening to that steady heartbeat, and felt the last of my anxiety melt away. "So," I said, my voice muffled by his shirt, "who was the flamingo and bowling pin bandit?" I felt his chest rumble with a low laugh. "My nephew. He's 15. I told him there was a guy up here who was a little lonely and could use some cheering up. I think he might have taken it a little too literally." I pulled back, staring at him in disbelief. You orchestrated the whole thing?" He had the good grace to look a little sheepish. "I orchestrated a way to check on you without it being weird." He supplied the artistic vision. I couldn't help it. I started to laugh, a deep, full-bellied laugh that felt like a release. All that worry, all that low-grade fear, had been the result of a well-meaning sheriff and his eccentric teenage nephew. It was absurd. It was perfect. His smile widened. "Glad you think it's funny." "It is," I said, my laughter subsiding. "It's the kindest, strangest thing anyone's ever done for me." We fell into a new rhythm after that. A quiet, easy pattern. He'd come by after his shift, bringing groceries or just himself. We'd cook dinner, we'd talk, We'd sit on the porch and watch the stars come out. The town was still talking, I knew. The story of the kiss at the general store had surely made the rounds. But I found I didn't care. When I was with Cole, the rest of the world and its opinions seemed to fade into a distant, unimportant hum. My cabin, once a fortress of solitude, became a sanctuary for two. He never stayed the whole night. He always left in the pre-dawn hours, a silent retreat back to his life, his responsibilities. It was an unspoken boundary, a line we hadn't crossed. I understood. He had a position to maintain. We were still new, fragile. But every morning, the empty space in my bed felt a little colder, a little lonelier. My own fears began to creep back in. Was this all we would ever be? Stolen hours in a secluded cabin? Was I still just a secret? One night, we were lying in my bed, the moonlight streaming through the window, painting silver stripes across the blankets. We weren't touching, just lying side by side, a careful inch of space between us. "My place is too quiet," he said suddenly, his voice soft in the darkness. I turned my head on the pillow to look at him. His profile was strong and handsome in the pale light. "So is mine," I whispered. He was quiet for a long time. I could feel him thinking, wrestling with something. "I want to wake up with you," he finally said, turning to face me. His voice was thick with emotion. "I want to wake up and have you still be there. In my house. In my bed. I'm tired of leaving." It was a conscious choice. A deliberate step. He was offering me more than just a night. He was offering me a morning. And all the mornings after that. Tears pricked my eyes. "I'm tired of you leaving too," I said. He reached across the space between us, his hand finding mine under the covers. He laced our fingers together, his thumb stroking over my knuckles. It wasn't a promise of forever. It was a promise of tomorrow. And for the first time in a very long time, I believed in tomorrow. The next day, he took me to his house. It was a simple, sturdy ranch house on the other side of town, with a big oak tree in the front yard. It was clean, sparse, and deeply, undeniably his. It smelled like him. He walked me through the quiet rooms, and then he stopped in the hallway, pulling a single key from his pocket. He pressed it into my palm and closed my fingers around it. "So you can come and go," he said simply. "So you never have to wonder if you're welcome." The final scene of my old life, the gray, lonely one, played out that afternoon. We drove back to my cabin in his truck. Together, we packed up my canvases, my paints, my books. We loaded everything that mattered into the back of his truck. I took one last look at the little cabin on the hill. It had been my hiding place, my refuge. But it wasn't my home anymore. That evening, we sat on his porch, watching the sun set. It wasn't a spectacular sunset, just a quiet fading of the light, the sky softening from blue to a dusty rose. He had his arm around my shoulders, and my head was resting against him. It was a simple, domestic intimacy that felt more profound than any grand gesture. I thought about my journey, about the man who had arrived in this town to disappear, to live in a world of gray. And I thought about the quiet, steady sheriff who had slowly, patiently, painted my world with color again. He hadn't rescued me. He had just stood by me, a solid, unwavering presence, and given me the courage to rescue myself. He leaned down and pressed a soft kiss to the top of my head. "You're quiet tonight," he murmured. I tilted my head back to look at him. Just thinking about what? I smiled, a real, easy smile. "That I don't feel scared anymore." He tightened his arm around me, pulling me closer. "Good," he said, "because I'm not letting you go." And as the last of the light bled from the sky and the first stars began to appear, I knew he was right. I wasn't alone anymore. I was finally, truly home.